That should be better. There we go. Hello. Yeah, so here we are. And I've never really been one for a video blog. I've never really been one to be on camera. I actually prefer the behind the camera stuff more than being on camera. But I thought that maybe this would be a good opportunity to maybe document what I'm going through and say some things that maybe I wasn't able to say, not just to my family, my wife, my parents, but to myself as well. Stuff, the kind of stuff that you don't necessarily want to think about or talk about. So this is what, or that is what this is going to be. Me not ranting, but sharing, pretty much. So today is the 28th of March. It's a Tuesday. No, it's a Monday. And tomorrow's a Tuesday. Tomorrow I have my bone marrow biopsy. So there's a lot of fear and stuff around that, specifically because I don't know what's going to be involved. And to be very honest with you, I'm not necessarily looking forward to going through that procedure, nor do I have the inclination to actually read about the process online. This is one of those things where I've got a notion in my head about what it's going to be like, and it's either going to be as bad as I think it's going to be, or it's going to be okay. And either way, to be honest, it's one of those things you got to do, right? There's no way around it. So why even bother reading about it or stuff like that? Because I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be. So let's just go ahead with it and see what happens. So 28th of March, it happens that it's exactly 2 weeks to the day that I got my mantle cell lymphoma diagnosis, where my family doctor had us come into her office to basically give us the news. Now, before this, we'd done a couple of tests, and it's almost been maybe even over a year now, where I initially felt a lump in my throat right here, and I can still feel it if I touch it, while I was shaving. And so initially we started off with an ultrasound through my family doctor, and she said, don't worry about it, I don't think it's anything specific. But I insisted. I said, no, well, don't worry about it, we don't know what it is, don't worry about it isn't necessarily an answer for me. I'd like to know what it is. So she ordered another ultrasound, and when that came back with the same results, and it's basically inflammation in the lymph nodes, but we don't know why. I went to her again and said, okay, let's what's the next step? What else can we do? They recommended an MRI. It took me about a month and a half, or maybe even more, to get an appointment for the MRI. I got my MRI appointment, and a couple of weeks later, they came back with the exact same thing. Now, in the MRI, they found more than the 1 or 2 lymph nodes that I'd initially felt. I think there were about 5 or 6. And so even then, they didn't know what the issue was. That's when I was given a consultation by an ENT. We thought that, since we can't find anything wrong with the lymph nodes, other than the fact that they're other than the inflammation, might as well go to an ENT and have them take a look. So I went to an ENT. He put a camera down my nose, looked around my throat, and said that everything was okay. But he was worried about the lymph nodes. So he took a needle aspiration right there, and that's basically where they take a needle, a regular syringe basically, and they stick it in to where you could feel it. And he tried to suck a little bit out of it out. I don't know how much actually came out. Maybe what they did was the actual cells that were stuck around the inside of the syringe. And the results on that came back as inconclusive. So the ENT specialist, when he did the needle aspiration, he told me that there's a very high chance that the results are going to come back as inconclusive. So what we'd like to do is do another biopsy where they actually go in using an ultrasound and look at the other lymph nodes that we can't necessarily see through the surface, and take samples of those. And then if that doesn't work, we'll do an open neck biopsy, basically. Cut it open, go inside, take a look at the lymph nodes. So the biopsy with the ultrasound was booked for a couple of weeks later, and I went in and they tried to get to the different lymph nodes there. And then what the doctor told me was interesting there, because as he was doing the biopsy, he said, I can see around 5 lymph nodes in the ultrasound. The 2 which are right here, and which I can feel, then are basically visible right under the surface of my skin. He said that those don't worry him because they have irregular shapes. And I'm assuming by irregular they meant oval shapes. But he said you've got a couple of round ones, perfectly round, not perfectly round, but close to perfectly round lymph nodes further in, and those are the ones that were an issue. Those were the ones that worried him, pretty much. So we took a biopsy of those guys, and oh my God, I have to tell you, that was quite difficult. The first couple he managed to get through easily, but then there was one that specifically that he wanted, and it kept jiggling out of the way every time he put his he tried to get his needle in there. It kept jiggling out of the way. So there I am, lying down on a table, ultrasound stick on one side of my throat, needle going into the other side, and he would just wiggle and jiggle the needle back and forth, trying to, I assume, scrape against something. So that was very, very uncomfortable. And to the point where once he was done and the nurse came over and started to clean me up and everything. And interestingly enough, this is the t-shirt that I was wearing at the time of that biopsy a couple of weeks ago. More than a couple of weeks ago, about a month and a half now. She came in, there was like blood pouring down the side of my throat and everything, my neck, not my throat. And so she cleaned that up, and then she stuck a little piece of cotton ball or whatever over the wound, and then she picked it up, she looked at it and said, "Oh, that doesn't look bad, given what he was doing to you." So I'm like, yeah, it didn't feel quite great either at the time. So yeah, that was quite an easy procedure. Came back and then waited for a couple of weeks to hear the results. And that's when, it was about exactly 2 weeks ago now, where we were called in. A number of times I called my family doctor in that time, and a number of times I called the specialist, the ENT specialist, and said, do you guys have any news? And they came back with, one set of the pathology had returned inconclusive. And I was like, okay, fine. If it's inconclusive, we'll wait and see what comes of it. But then when my family doctor gave us a call and said, all right, could you come in on Monday for a meeting? This was over the weekend. This was right before the weekend. I think on Thursday or Friday, she called us and said, can you come in on Monday for a meeting? I was like, yikes, pretty much. And when we went in, my wife wanted to be there with me. And I said, that's fine. Yeah, I'm not going to ask her not to come. So she came in, and that's when the doctor said that, yeah, it's lymphoma. It's mantle cell lymphoma. And I was like, okay, cool. What do we do? What do we do about it? What's the procedure? And we set up an appointment with an oncologist who I met last week. I didn't meet. I spoke to on the phone last week. Number of blood tests, urine analysis, and a CT scan is what I did in the meantime. And so the CT scan showed that there were a number of other lymph nodes that where inflammation could be seen under my arms, under my chest, under my diaphragm apparently, and then in my groin, but not large enough to basically scare them in terms of the progression of the disease. So what the doctor said is based on what he could see on the CT scan and what he could see on the blood tests and everything, I seem to be in a stage 3A, and pretty much the treatment regimen is chemo followed by bone marrow transplant. And the bone marrow transplant basically uses my own stem cells from my bone marrow, and they basically I go through chemo, and then they basically give me the my own bone marrow back after the chemo is done, and after I'm assuming they do some type of full body radiation to destroy my current bone marrow. Now, these are the kind of things that I've seen on TV shows. These are the kind of things that, I've seen happen on shows like House and things like that. People getting full body radiation, people getting bone marrow transplants. Yeah, I never really thought that this was something that I would probably have to go through. It's humbling, for lack of a better word. It is humbling, because these kind of things are usually the kind of things that happen to somebody else, right? Everybody knows somebody who's gone through cancer, but you don't usually expect it to happen to yourself. So when it does, it's quite difficult to get a handle on it. And I find myself worried about my kids more than anything else. The idea of me not being around for them is what troubles me more than anything else. For some strange reason, I'm not too worried about what the prognosis is, what this diagnosis means, what cancer is, basically. But I do know that I want to be here for my kids, and I want to be here more than a couple of years. So I don't want them to go through their teens without their dad. I don't want them to go through their early 20s without their dad. I'm lucky enough to have my dad right now. At the age of 39, I've got my dad here with me. And I know a lot of people who don't. And quite frankly, I couldn't imagine going through my life without my dad in my life. And I don't want to imagine my kids going through their life without their dad. So that's the only point that is a worry for me right now. Everything else I'm totally fine with. There's nothing that bothers me, nothing that worries me. Obviously, I mean, discomfort and things like that, they're not something that you look forward to, but I think I'm okay with it. I think I'm going to be fine with the discomfort. I think I'm going to be okay with chemo. I think I'm going to be okay with all of that crap. The thought of not being around for my kids, though, is one that I don't necessarily want to think about. I was speaking to Mona the other day, and I told her, I'm not worried about you. You're going to be fine. And she thought that she didn't like that very much. She said it was heartbreaking to hear me say that I thought she was going to be fine if something happened to me. But the truth of the matter is that I do think she's going to be fine. She's a wonderful mom, brilliant woman, brilliant person. And I'm not worried about her at all, because I'm absolutely certain that she's going to be fine. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be fun, but she's going to pull through, and I know she is. I'm not too sure about the kids, though. But having said that, I mean, people go through this kind of thing quite often. Lots of kids grow up without one or both of their parents. So, it is what it is, I guess. That being said, I'm going to fight that much harder, and I'm going to try to make sure that I am around for them, and that I don't leave them without a dad. That's where we are today. Yeah, so I think every once in a while, I don't know how what do you call it? How often I'll put up these videos, but I'll try to put them up as often as possible, just to have basically a timeline of everything that goes on and happens. And on that note, I'm gonna go away, and I'll catch you on the other side.